Okay, this is a recorded video lecture for public speaking. And in this lecture, we want to learn about or discuss understanding the principles of speaking, where we want to persuade an audience to do something, uh, specifically the process of changing or reinforcing a listener's attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. However, I'm going to put the emphasis on changing people's behavior because that is probably the most difficult thing to do. But if you change their behavior, you've automatically changed their attitudes and beliefs in general. Um, so I want to focus on that, especially in the assignment that will be given or is being given. The objective is to change your audience's behavior, to get them to do something. And I find generally your speech will be better if you have a specific objective for them to do something. You're pushing towards that point, as opposed to attitudes and behaviors, which tend to be um, persuasion might be a little softer there. So we're going to try to change people's behaviors, which ultimately um, if we are to be leaders, if we are to really affect the world around us, that's what we need to do, is change other people's behaviors. We also need to understand that resistance to persuasion will vary. Sometimes we have people who are situations where there's an expression called preaching to the choir. You're essentially just reinforcing the attitudes that people already have. Specifically, with the preaching to the choir bit, um, members of the choir are already on board. That's why they joined the choir. They are in support of the general mission of the church and what the preacher is saying. Um, and that while that happens a lot, that is not probably the most effective in terms of creating change because they're already where you want them to be. On the other hand, you might occasionally have hostile audiences. Members of this audience are diametrically opposed to what you want them to do or to believe. And in most cases, you'll probably have people who are kind of in between. Maybe they haven't made up their mind. And this is probably where you can be most effective because they're not against you, but you can move them to the point where they're for whatever it is that you're being a proponent for, whatever it is that you're arguing. And there are many types of persuasive speeches, many uses for them. Um, Election campaign speeches, which unfortunately we see an awful lot of these days, whether we want to or not. Vote for me or vote for this other person, or vote for maybe a referendum or some agenda item where you're trying to get people to vote. Which voting is generally a good thing, and certainly in a democracy. And these are necessary. We also may give sales presentations trying to sell a product or service or tickets to an event or whatever it is that we're trying to sell. And we're asking people to give money in exchange for something. And therefore, we have to present the benefits of that product or service or event or whatever it is that we're selling. In any organization, you will have to make presentations if you want to convince your superiors, the people in charge, to do something. And I've often made proposal presentations where I proposed to an organization or to the managers or to the trustees or whomever that I think this is a project or an activity they should undertake, and I have to make a case for it. And this is not uncommon, particularly with large organizations where um, a lot of the decisions in large organizations are not automatically made by whoever's at the top, the CEO or president or whomever. Often in many organizations, it's consensus building within the organization, getting everyone on board to move ahead and particularly the leaders to approve whatever it is that you're proposing. It might be a marketing plan, it might be an investment, whatever that is, any activity really. Recruitment speeches are quite common, trying to get people to join our church, join our team, join our military, join our company, join our club, whatever it is. And we see that quite often. Um, so. Donation solicitations, which is a little slightly different than a sales presentation. Here we're asking people to donate. It may be money, it may be um, donating their time, blood donations, donating used clothing or used cars, or whatever it is. We're not giving them anything in return, but we're trying to convince them of the worthiness of the organization that we're asking them to donate to. Or to the individual. Sometimes individuals will ask for donations for something, and that's fine too. And that happens all the time. And you may be able to find other examples of persuasive speeches. I do have another one here, and that is a debate. Often they're political debates, but there are other types of debates as well. It's kind of a special case where there are sort of dueling persuasive speeches, where you have to make a point and your opponent will make a counterpoint, and you will have to counter their points as well. And we see this most often in political debates, but there are other types of debates as well. If you're interested in debate, Middlesex County College has another course called Discussion and Debate. Its designation is SPE 123. It's taught usually by Professor DeLomo. I'm told it's a very good course. Students seem to enjoy it. So, if you're at Middlesex, I would encourage you to investigate taking that course. So I want to talk a little bit about the classical approach of understanding persuasion. And by classical, I mean as in the Greeks, the original classical. The Greeks were the first to speak about rhetoric. And this started, I think, talking about dealing with court cases, lawyers trying to persuade juries to give the verdicts they want. And in exploring that, they came up with 3 areas that they felt should be focused on. Think of them as 3 legs of a stool, each providing support. The first is ethos, or in English we would call it, refer to credibility. If you are trying to persuade an audience of something, you have to have a certain credibility. You have to be perceived as maybe not an expert, but certainly being an expert helps, but somebody who has experience or knowledge and is not just sort of running off at the mouth. For instance, if I were saying, we're going to have a seminar on diplomacy and international affairs, and I bring in a speaker, let's say I bring in Hillary Clinton or Colin Powell, these people would have credibility. Both were former secretaries of state. Both engage in diplomacy on a global scale. So they would certainly have credibility in the topic. Oh no, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. We don't have Colin Powell or Hillary Clinton, we have Kim Kardashian. Well, Ms. Kardashian would probably not have, in fact, definitely would not have the same credibility on that topic, although she might be willing to talk about it. Doesn't have quite the same gravitas or, as I said, credibility. Although if the topic were different, maybe it was makeup tips or how to become a reality TV star, she certainly would have credibility in that area. So credibility often is tied to the topic. Rarely do people have credibility. I can't think of anyone who has significant credibility under all topics. I think that's probably impossible. But for a particular topic, it's important. Now, the people I just mentioned are all famous. I'm not famous, and I suspect you're not famous either. So how do we deal with that? Well, one way is that we introduce ourselves. We give a little bit of our background, any degrees we might have if they're relevant, any experiences we might have that are relevant. Even better yet, we could have somebody else introduce us. And that just gives us a little bit more credibility if it's a third person saying it, even though, like for instance, I've given talks and I've had people introduce me, and I actually write something, how I want to be introduced. That's helpful. Sometimes I write it out exactly how I want it said. Sometimes I just give them bullet points. It depends upon who the person is who's introducing me. And that's a good way to establish a certain amount of credibility. The next element is logos, or as we say in English, logic. Yes, the case you make has to have a certain logic, and we need to avoid those logical fallacies, which we talked about in a previous lecture. We want to make a logical case, which seems, fairly obvious. And the last element is pathos. And by pathos, we mean appealing to emotions. We are emotional beings. We are beings of intellect, but also beings of emotion. And here it's interesting to talk a little bit about the brain. And maybe compare it to a little bit like computers. If I were to ask you how many brains we have, most of you would say, well, we have one brain, but there is an argument to be made that we have multiple brains. And this is where I compare it to computers. IBM years ago created a computer which was called Big Blue, as I recall. And Big Blue was one of the first major steps in artificial intelligence. They programmed the Big Blue, the computer, with the rules of chess. The rook goes forward and sideways, the bishop goes on diagonals, and all the rules. And that was fine. And so now the computer could play chess with somebody. But the computer didn't understand strategy. And that was a bit harder to teach. But the important point about Big Blue is it could learn. So if it played against a human being in chess, it would learn from the experience. And at first it lost almost every game. But then after a while, the computer learned how to play chess better, and then started beating that human being. So then they brought in chess grandmasters, and the computer started losing again. But eventually, the computer, Big Blue, learned and could beat the chess grandmasters. And this was a major step forward in artificial intelligence. The problem was that that's all Big Blue could do. It could play chess, it couldn't play poker, it couldn't play tic-tac-toe, Now jump ahead a few years, IBM comes up with another computer called Watson, and Watson became famous when they put Watson on the game show Jeopardy with Alex Trebek. And they actually had the computer set up at the podium, and it was competing against, and who did they have Watson play against? The two top winners of Jeopardy, people who have won, I think the maximum amount that they could. And the key was that Watson was not one computer. It was actually a series of network computers. There was one computer whose job it was simply to determine what type of question it was. Was it a music question? Was it a literature question? Was it a mathematical question? Whatever the thing. And then it would route the problem to whichever computer was configured best to deal with that type of question. And of course, like its predecessor, Big Blue, Watson, cleaned the clock of the competitors. And that was, again, another major step. And actually now Watson is used commercially. I know it's used in the medical field, and it's used in other fields for problem solving and so forth. And this comes back, now I have to come back to the human brain. And the human brain actually has different parts, which you may be somewhat aware of. Certainly you're aware that there's the left brain and the right brain. And that's part of the cerebral cortex and other parts. And the part that we're most interested in for our discussion here is the amygdala. And you can see it on the diagram here. It's very small. The amygdala is the oldest part of the brain. All the rest of the parts of the brain, except evolved over time. So let's, for just a moment, de-evolve. Let's go back millions of years to when all we pretty much had was the amygdala. The amygdala is actually sometimes called the lizard brain or the dinosaur brain. Not really. They are. It is a mammalian brain, but well, I believe it is actually. So let's imagine that we are creatures in the wild, in the wilderness, and we come across another creature. And one of four things will happen in that situation. The first is the most uninteresting. It's we'll just ignore each other. Okay. The next thing is that we may try to eat that other creature. The third thing is that other creature might try to eat us. And the fourth option is that maybe we'll hang out with that creature. We'll cooperate with that creature, help each other. And actually, that was a major evolutionary step forward when creatures of the same species started to cooperate and form herds and flocks and schools and other, whatever all the group nouns are. Now, the interesting thing about the amygdala, it actually has very little capacity for language. It's a very basic brain. So imagine this situation. You go up to this other creature and say, "Will I be eating you today, or will you be eating me?" Well, if you could imagine that's a bizarre situation, it's not going to end well. Either if that thing eats you, or then you're done. If you try to eat this other thing, it might. Well, if you want to eat that other thing, it might run away. So the amygdala needs very simple rules. It's a primitive brain. Looks small and tasty, eat. Big, has teeth, run away. Looks like me, will hang out. Really simple things. We call these instincts. Very simple decisions. Okay, let's come back to the present. It's late at night. We are walking down a city street, maybe New Brunswick or some other city, and somebody pulls out a knife and points it at you and says, "Give me all your money." Now, in that first second, what happens to you physically? Well, your heartbeat is going to speed up. Your blood pressure is going to go skyrocket. Adrenaline is going to start flowing into your bloodstream. And some of you may be familiar with this. It's called the fight or flight response. Now, you didn't decide to do this. Your body just started to do it. Well, actually, it was the amygdala that did that. Now, you might say, well, if you're pointing a knife at me, it must mean you're having financial difficulties. There is a soup kitchen over here, and there's over there is an employment agency. Maybe they can help you. There are various social services. Let me help you. We both know that's not going to happen, and part of it is the amygdala takes over. Now, I certainly hope you've never actually had this situation I'm describing. It's a horrible, awful situation. But you have had situations where you maybe got upset, you got very emotional, and whatever happened in that situation, you reacted, and then later after you've calmed down, you start thinking about this situation, and you start thinking about the things you should have done. Maybe it's something you should have said, or maybe it's something you should have preferred not saying, or something you did that you should have wish you had undone. And part of you thinks, why didn't I do that then? And the answer comes back to the amygdala. In stressful situations, the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, takes over. It says, hey, it's like the fight or flight response. I've been here for millions of years. Forget the smarty pants part of the brain. This is what I'm here for. And the amygdala, it helped us for millions of years to survive these difficult situations. However, in a more civilized world, where people do public speaking, it's not as useful. Although we can, of course, be in situations where it would be useful again, such as the situation I just described. But the point is that emotions can actually sometimes shut down our intellect. If you want to convince people, and I don't care how smart they are, there is always an emotional component. I remember an ad strangely enough, for IBM computers years ago. They were selling IBM computers to businesses. This is long before they were selling them to individuals. And they had a slogan that said, "No one ever got fired buying IBM. No one ever lost their job for buying an IBM." And what IBM was trying to say is, we're true, we're tested, we are solid. Don't you don't want to get fired for buying a competitor who's untested. And this essentially was an emotional appeal. It was appealing to people's insecurity, and that can be, so even, and I've worked with a lot of highly intelligent people, including scientists, and they are just as capable of being emotional as the rest of us. I mean, generally in their um, area of expertise, they tend to be very logical. But once they go outside that area of expertise, they tend not to be as reliably dependent on their intellect. And I know of scientists who've made some very emotional decisions, unfortunately. So when appealing to emotions, we need to be very careful. Um, there is a line that we don't want to go past. We always want to stay truthful. We want to avoid um, using logical fallacies, as I spoke about previously, even though they often will be emotionally effective. Yes, you can use the emotional appeal, but there is an ethical line which you should not cross. Okay. I also want to talk a little bit about dissonance. Dissonance, well, I want you to stop for a moment, and I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to think about being on campus. You're in a classroom on your campus, whether it's in your high school or on the Middlesex campus or another campus, whatever campus you frequent. And imagine you're in a classroom, one of the classrooms that you've been in many times. You look around that classroom and it's got desks and it's got, um, whiteboards or chalkboards or whatever it's got. Okay, now imagine traveling to the cafeteria. Um, however you have to get there, whichever hallways, maybe you have to go outside to get to that cafeteria and work your way and follow that path that you normally take to the cafeteria. Now look around the cafeteria. There are tables. There's a place where they maybe serve burgers or sandwiches. There's the cash register area. Maybe there's a salad bar, wherever you are. Okay. Now, as you did that, you imagined going from the classroom to the cafeteria, but you weren't actually there. And the reason you can do that is that you have a model of the world in your head. That model may be, the physical model. Often when I do this in the physical classroom, I tell students to imagine they're in their bedroom and they're going to their kitchen. A similar situation. You have a model of your home in your head. You have a model of your workplace or your school, and you can expand that model. This last semester, I actually went into a building on campus that I had never been to before, and so that expanded my model of the campus. This model also extends to how we interact with people. We understand how things work in general, how people work. For instance, if we want to make somebody like us, we have an idea of certain things that we do. So now, and that model, as I said, can be added to, but trouble is there is a very negative reaction created when somebody violates that model, where somebody tries to contradict that model. That model can change slightly over time, but we're resistant to letting it change too quickly. And so dissonance is this feeling of mental conflict or a lack of harmony that we feel when somebody violates our model, gives us information that is difficult for us to process. It contradicts information that we already have. And it's interesting, and this goes to something called confirmation bias. When somebody tells us something that agrees with our model, we tend to believe it. When it contradicts our model, we tend to disbelieve it, which is why, for instance, people who are on the political spectrum, liberals tend to disbelieve anything that is said that contradicts their version of the world, and conservatives in the same way will avoid, don't want to believe things that will contradict their views, but they seek out things that reinforce. Um, like, also on a personal level, for instance, there are people we like and people we dislike. We tend to believe bad things about people we dislike and tend to believe good things about people we like. Um, when somebody, and we've all, hopefully not too much, but have this experience where somebody who we trusted betrayed us, and that created a lot of dissonance. Not so much in what the specific betrayal was, but our model of that person has now changed, and that's creates a little angst. Or for me, even worse, when somebody I don't like does something nice for me, that drives me nuts because that violates the model. Um, and it creates this lack of this mental discomfort. And there are various reactions to dissonance, this type of disharmony. And listeners may discredit you, disregard you. This person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're a bad person, or whatever. They're a fascist, or they're a communist, or whatever it is that we are in that way. So we just disregard them. They don't know what they're talking about. They're stupid. They're evil. Whatever it is, it enables us to maintain our model. So we just keep them out. In some cases, we may reinterpret the message. We say, well, what they really meant was, and we distort what somebody says to fit our model. Now, some people, admittedly, will seek new information to validate their view of the world. Okay, that's not actually the worst response. At least they're seeking information. They're just not automatically rejecting. And in doing that, they may learn something new. They may adjust their model. So some people, admittedly, will just stop listening. They'll stick their fingers in their ears. They'll walk out of the room. They'll hang up the phone. I had somebody do that to me. They didn't like what I was saying, so they hung up on me. That happens from time to time. But occasionally, to resolve this dissonance, this feeling of disharmony, people might actually change their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. It happens. And a lot has to do with the personality of the person, how open-minded they are to new information. And it depends a lot about the upbringing of the person, how much propaganda or indoctrination they're exposed to, and how long that's been. So, for instance, it's very difficult to get people who are older to change their attitudes because they've believed something for so long, and it's very difficult to do that. Actually, people who are real hardcore propagandists go after young people. A lot of effort has been put into that. This is why there's always debates over education, because they want to indoctrinate people when they're young. And I don't mean necessarily being evil. They just want, in fact, growing up Catholic, I remember there was an office for the indoctrination of faith. They wanted to indoctrinate you. And they were quite open about it. And a lot of people are. If you look at Germany, Nazi Germany, the Hitler Youth was all about indoctrinating young children. As we talked about previously, children are sponges. They absorb information. So, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent there, but it kind of, if we want to persuade people, hopefully seek out people who are more open-minded. But sometimes you don't have a choice. So you just have to deal with what you have. So you want to be careful about challenging people's views too harshly, or too straight on. I'll give a great example of an effective way. During the 2008 election, candidate Barack Obama was invited to the church of a conservative pastor named Rick Warren. Now, Rick Warren is conservative. He did not agree, but he invited both presidential candidates that year. He invited John McCain as well, and that's so forth. Um, so anyway, Barack Obama is a liberal. He focused, and his audience was conservative. And there's no way that he's going to hit straight on with his views, particularly the view that was most um, contentious was the issue of abortion. So, Barack Obama could come in and say, you pro-lifers are wrong. And they're just going to resist him, and, just as if they said to him, no, you're wrong. It's just not, you're never going to get anywhere. So what Obama did was he said, hey, I'm pro-choice and you're pro-life, and I respect that. But where we have common ground is that we both want to reduce unwanted pregnancies. So he doesn't try to break their model of the world. He doesn't do that. He says he tries to find the common ground. And for that, he avoids the dissonance, and he finds something that they can agree on. And so that's far more effective than hitting people over the head with a hammer. That cracks the view, everyone's model. So going forward. All right. Next, I want to talk about persuading through needs. Some of you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you are, you know that the first level is survival. If I drop you on a desert island, you're going to be looking for food, water, shelter, eventually, some way to clothe yourself. These days, most of you probably don't have to do hunting and gathering. If you do hunting and gathering, probably your favorite hunting grounds is the supermarket. Instead of using a bow and arrow or a spear, you use cash or a credit card. And so money is what fulfills our survival needs in modern society. And so often that's why, you can often persuade people by paying them. It helps them survive. The next level is security or safety. Now, if I were to ask you, what products do people buy to meet their safety and security needs? Well, you might say, locks and surveillance systems and maybe guns, alarm systems, that sort of thing. But also things like life insurance, medical insurance. Now, these are things that you usually don't buy medical insurance when you need it. You buy it, when you're sick, you buy it, looking forward. They hope you don't get sick, but if you know you might, so therefore you buy the medical insurance. This is also why you are attending college courses, because that you will be able to compete better in the job market if you have an education, if you have a diploma. You actually can survive in this world without a college education, but you'll do better. You'll be more secure if you get the college education. The next level is belonging or social needs. Human beings are social animals. We have a need to be with other human beings. I've always thought that, God forbid I ever end up in a prison. I would want to, or God forbid any of us end up in prison. You end up in prison and you commit a crime, what do they do to you? You're already in prison. Well, then they put you in solitary confinement, which I always thought, if I were in prison, that's where I'd want to go first. I'd be safe from all the other prisoners, all the other criminals. Actually, it is a more severe punishment. I didn't originally think so, but isolation is very difficult for people. In fact, we are learning that through the pandemic. A lot of people are having trouble being isolated, even if it's just with their families. Maybe because of it's with their families, I don't know. But the point is, we need to socialize. And it could be platonic or it could be romantic. I'm talking kind of about either one. So you think about the products that are sold, that people are persuaded to buy to help with their social needs. Fashion. If you're going to have a date, you want to wear nice clothes. Maybe fragrances, colognes and perfumes, and so forth. If you well, look at all the dating sites are out there. That is to fulfill social needs. And some of you may be familiar with them, Tinder and um, eHarmony and Christian Mingle. And one of my favorites actually is Farmers Only, because farmers live a very different kind of life, and therefore they have a different, they're looking for people who have a similar type of life. Particularly, for instance, if you're a dairy farmer. If you're a dairy farmer, you have to milk those cows at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and you have to be, um, you can't miss it, otherwise the cows go dry. So late night dates for dairy farmers is particularly difficult, and they have a different culture in general. Farmers, a different work ethic, a different way of looking at the world, and so they want to, eat. And there are all sorts of others. And you'll notice a lot of these dating sites specialize in certain types of people, maybe ethnically or in other ways, situationally. Next is our status or esteem needs. Now, if let's say 5 to 10 years from now, I bump into you on the street and you're successful at whatever you've chosen to do, what would be the concrete things that I could observe? What would be the status symbols that would tell me that you're successful? It might be, it might be your clothes. You're wearing nicer clothes, maybe jewelry. Maybe you have a nice car. Maybe you've got a BMW or a Mercedes or something like that. So these would be status symbols. Other status symbols include things like titles. I actually had a friend who we worked together, and we were our company was moving, and I think I've mentioned this previously. Our company was moving to Georgia. We've decided not to go to Georgia, and my friend got 2 job offers. One was a company, well, they were offering him more money, but it wasn't the kind of company he wanted to work for. It wasn't that he didn't think the job was exactly what he wanted. The other company was more in line with what he wanted, more creative, but they didn't offer him the same amount of money. So, and again, a little dissonance on his part. And so how he resolved it was he went to the company that he wanted to work for, but was offering less money, and said, would you give, he was a graphic designer, that was the name of the position. And he said, if you make the name of the position art director instead of graphic designer, I'll take the job. And so he traded the money for status, the title. And of course, for instance, if you're in the military, do you want to be a corporal or you want to be a colonel, which has more status? In corporations or business in general, there's the worker, there's the supervisor, the manager, the director, the executive director, the vice president, the CEO, and titles have a lot to do. In the company that I worked at, it was how many windows you had in your office. I had 2 windows, but I didn't have a cubicle. So I had, the first people, those people had cubicles, and then I had 2 windows, and my boss had 3 windows. And I didn't really think about this until I took a proposal to my boss. He said, "Oh, I love this proposal, but I don't have enough windows to approve it." And I realized immediately what he was talking about. He was talking about power level and office size. And so we took it up to Mr. 4 Windows, and he approved it. Now, there is something in business that is quite iconic. It is called the corner office. Even if somebody doesn't know where they're going to work, they say, someday I want that corner office. They're being ambitious. What is so special about the corner office? Well, yes, it's a nice view and all that, but one of the great things about the corner office that makes it very attractive is there's a limited number. Think of your typical rectangular building. It only has 4 corner offices. It's a certain exclusivity that is offered. Now, in my company, we had a president and 3 vice presidents. We're all set. But then they made a 4th person a vice president. What are they going to do? So what they did, the president kept his corner office, and they turned the other 3 corner offices into conference rooms, and gave the 4 vice presidents 4 window offices, 16 in total, I guess, which seems like it's a demotion, but it's not. So what they did to counter the change in the office situation is they gave each vice president a furniture catalog. And they said, you can have whatever kind of furniture you want. Now, most of us had sort of these sheet metal desks with the fake wood Formica tops. We had no choice. That's what we got. If they wanted cherry, if they wanted oak, mahogany, whatever, if they wanted bookcases, if they wanted a couch, if they wanted plants, whatever they wanted, they could have. And so that was their status symbol. And they protected that because one of my colleagues who also had a 2-window office, her job was to manage the approval process for all sorts of literature. And she asked her husband, who was a carpenter, to make a special shelf unit for her with certain cubby holes so she could, by where she put the file and where she put the promotional brochure, that would tell what stage of approval was in. And it was a very practical, it wasn't a finished piece of furniture. I think it was just bare wood. Within 2 days, someone from from corporate came in and said, you have to get rid of that shelf. Only vice presidents and above are allowed to have custom furniture. So you often find people will protect their status symbols, the exclusivity of them. And it's often the exclusivity of them that gives it the status. For instance, if everyone had a BMW, it would no longer be a status symbol. So, and there are other status symbols. If you've ever been employee of the month or that sort of thing, or maybe a degree. I was actually thinking about, it'd be cool to be Dr. Bale. I was thinking about going for my PhD, but decided not to for various reasons. So, all right. So now I get to pull out my magic wand. And I'm going to wave my magic wand, and poof, you all now have $10 billion. Congratulations, you have $10 billion. I assume that you will pay off any debts that you have, which is a responsible thing to do. You'll take care of your family. You will, make sure everyone's okay. I assume you'll give to charity. Maybe you'll go traveling. Okay. So let's let a year go by in our fictitious scenario here. Now, what are you going to do? You don't have to work. You could actually take that $10 billion and put it in a low interest savings account, and you could live very comfortably on that. Although I expect you'd probably use a higher yield investment. But the point is, you no longer have any need for income. You automatically have it. You are surviving. You will feel secure. Your social needs will be met. Everyone will want to be your friend. You will have long lost relatives calling up just to say hello. Any of those status symbols that you wanted, you can now obtain. Sorry about that. Sorry. Anyway, all those status symbols you can buy. Even if it's a PhD, you could go and get the PhD. Not that you could buy it, but you could afford to go after your PhD. So what do you do now? And this is an area we call self-actualization. You are going to do things just for yourself, just to test yourself, to prove yourself. It's not about buying things so much, it's about doing. For instance, I'm sure many of you have been to Walt Disney World in Florida, where the Magic Teacup ride, and It's a Small World After All, which I personally can't stand, but anyway, Space Mountain, all that. But in Walt Disney World, you can also go to Disney School, at least when it's open, after the pandemic. And these are people you can take courses, immersion courses in tennis, in photography, in cooking, in Disney, of course, animation. Now, this is not vocational training. These are people who are on vacation, immersing themselves in it because they want to. They're challenging themselves. I'll give you another example. At the first college that I worked at, I actually got to be fairly friendly with the college president, something that's not happened since. Generally, faculty don't spend a lot of time hanging out with the college president, except maybe at official functions. But Bill, the president of the college, and I got along fairly well. And one of the things that helped was that his son wanted to become a chef. He wanted to go to a college, and he was considering the Culinary Institute of America, which is a very prestigious culinary school. And my nephew had already gone there and actually had gone on to work in several of the top restaurants in the company, ones with Michelin stars, ones that I can't generally afford to eat in on any regularity. And I said, well, if you want, I can connect my nephew to your son, and he can give him advice about career and about CIA and so forth. And I kind of connected them and walked away from it, let them take care of it. Then the second week of the semester at that college, we usually had a free food event. And if there's a free food event, I'm pretty much there. And so I get in line, and it's hamburgers and hot dogs, and who's flipping the burgers? But it's Bill, the college president. I say, hey, Bill, how you doing? I'll take 2 burgers. And I notice he's wearing a CIA apron, the Culinary Institute of America. So I said, oh, so your son went to CIA? And he said, oh, no, he went to the University of West Virginia for their program. Said, okay, then why are you wearing a Culinary Institute of America apron? You know, something that you can buy at their campus. I said, oh, I went. I said, what do you mean you went? So I went for a weekend immersion course in souffles. I always want to make souffles, and souffles admittedly are difficult to make. You know, they often fall. It's and dropping is sort of almost a cliche. Now, he wasn't getting vocational training. He was testing himself. He was pushing himself, something he wanted to learn how to do. And I've tried to do that myself. I often will take courses. At Middlesex, I actually took a course in the 3D modeling software and learning how to do that. So my question here, I guess, at this point is, which of these levels would you consider to be the strongest motivator? Now, some of you would probably say, oh, it's survival, or some might say self-actualizations. Others, you know, we all have different opinions. And it's kind of a trick question. The answer is whichever, and this is where something you should put in your notes, the strongest motivator is the need that is lowest and unmet. The need that is the lowest unmet need is what is going to motivate you strongest. We have all these motivations, but the one that is primary at any given point is the one that is not being fulfilled and is the lowest. And I'll give, again, myself as an example. Years ago, I was working for a company. I was surviving. I felt secure. I had a secure job. I was making a decent money. For my social needs, I had friends, both at work and outside work, and you know, a wife and 2 kids. So I was good. I had my 2-window office for how old I was at the time. I felt that was, you know, that was a step up from having a cubicle. So I was happy. And what motivated me most, strangely enough, was self-actualization. You know, there were a lot of things I could have done to impress my superiors, but I wanted to do things that nobody else was doing. I learned how to build a website. This is, you know, again, the 90s, so websites were just starting to be a thing. And there were other things I learned how to do, certain types of programming that nobody else was doing, at least in my company. And, you know, that was what motivated me. And in fact, I often would, you know, take courses. In fact, and this is a sort of a career tip, if you work for a company that will pay for your education, whether it's just individual courses or for a degree, you know, tuition reimbursement, take advantage of it, you know. Also another tip, if it's like just for a course, do it early in the year before budgets get cut, you know. In fact, I had some people get annoyed at me because I would use up the training budget. In fact, I remember one time hearing my department head saying to another member of my department, sorry, Bail used up the training budget already. So sorry about that, whoever that was, but it's the way it goes. And then, of course, as I think I've told you before, somebody came in. We had a new CEO come in, and after 6 months brought us into a room and said, we're moving to Georgia. and I knew I wasn't moving to Georgia with the company. So all of a sudden, my primary motivation was now safety and security. I had I had a wife and 2 kids, and I had a mortgage, and I had to make sure that I was secure and do what I had to do. And I think I told you I went into consulting and then teaching. Um, so there we go. And actually, at that first college, I I started moving up the pyramid again. I had friends at work, and I felt secure. I had a certain esteem. I became the chairman of the faculty committee, and I was working on things like accreditation, and so self-actualization, and was motivating me once again. And then we got the announcement that the college was closing down. It was a smaller college, and it just didn't kind of work there. So went back down to the bottom again. Well, back down to security again. So these are the things that will, and this will happen to you as well as you go through life. So, all right. I also want to talk about positive motivations, and primarily in the sales situation. You want to focus on the positive values of whatever it is that you're proposing. Particularly in sales, you want to emphasize the benefits of a product or service that you're selling, and not so much the features. You might want to mention the features, but you want to emphasize the benefits. Now, what's the difference? Features are the characteristics of what's being discussed. If it's a product, it's the color, the materials, the physicality. If it's like an insurance, it's the technical, the coverage, that sort of thing. But the question is, then what are the benefits? The benefits are the good results that create a positive response. It's the reason that somebody might buy. Why do people buy insurance? Because they want the security, they want the peace of mind. That is what you're selling, as opposed to, the coverage. The coverage is the details of the product. For instance, I'll give you another example. There is something called the Aeron chair. It is actually a chair which it's an office chair. It's on rollers. It adjusts. It's actually a great chair. They cost, I think, between $600 and $800. I got one for $40. I got it at a corporate garage sale. I'm thrilled. And so for my sales and marketing class, I give them the job of trying to sell this chair, and I say, you've got 2 people you have to convince. You're not selling one chair, you're selling hundreds to an organization that would buy them. And I said, okay, first you have to sell to the CEO, and the CEO will never sit in this chair except by mistake. They've got their big red leather, big boss chair that he or she will sit in at his or her desk. And then the second person you have to sell to is a worker who's been asked for their opinion. They'll work it. So same product, the same chair, but 2 different customers, 2 different audiences. So you're selling to the CEO. If you say, well, it's a really comfortable chair, the CEO doesn't care that it's a comfortable chair. What does the CEO care about? They don't care about the gears, the wheels, the webbing, anything like that on the chair. What do they care about? They care about profits. If you say, well, this chair will make your workers more productive. Oh, okay, productivity CEOs they like that because productivity will lead to profitability. And that's the thing that will benefit them, as opposed to it's comfortable. The worker cares if it's comfortable, but they might also care that, well, if it's, one thing about the Aeron chair, it's very supportive, gives great lumbar support. People don't have to get up and stretch as much. And that means that they can get out of the office earlier. I told you that my company went to Atlanta. I went to visit them as a consultant, and I asked them how did they like this new facility, and I noted the chairs, and they said we love it. I said, remember when we were in New Jersey, we would often work to 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. Now I can finish my work. I don't have to get up and stretch. People are not walking around, interrupting me. I can leave at 5 o'clock and feel perfectly comfortable that I've done everything I've had to do that day. So, and that was a benefit for the worker as well as comfort. So The product is the same. The features are the same, but the benefits are going to depend upon who the person is, who you're talking to. Okay. We can also talk about negative motivations. And here we're talking about the fear appeal. Now, I am not, make sure you understand this, I am not talking about ever threatening your audience. That is not what we're talking about, but we're talking about making your audience afraid of something. You know, I remember there was a Terminex commercial that made everyone afraid of bugs. And of course, they were selling services. They were selling services to get rid of bugs, extermination services. So they made you afraid of the bugs, and then they had the solution. That's what you do. You make your audience afraid of something, and then you provide the solution. You see with politicians, they always try to make you afraid of the opposing politician, and the solution is to vote for them. So, and fear, again, back to the amygdala. Fear is a very powerful motivator. I'm not saying it should always be used, but it is there. And you can use if-then statements. You know, if this bad thing happens, then this other bad thing will happen, and you can build on that, sort of a cascade effect. Also, it's important to note that threats to loved ones are far more successful than those aimed at audience members. If you listen, I will do things that may be a little dangerous from time to time, things I would not let my children do. For instance, during Hurricane Sandy, I had two trees come down on my house in the middle of the night. And my son just wanted to run outside and see what was going on. I pulled him back. I said, no, we don't know if where that tree fell. We don't know if it's going to continue to fall. Then I went out. I did the thing that I told my son not to do, because I wanted to assess the situation. We are more willing to take risks with our own lives, with our own well-being, than we are with our loved ones. Listen, you threaten me, I'm not happy. You threaten my kids, I'll kill you. And anyone who's a parent will understand this. You know, threats to loved ones we take far more seriously than to ourselves. And also, and this goes back to credibility, the greater the trust in the speaker, the more successful the threat. You know, that person, that Chicken Little person who's always yelling, the sky is falling, we don't tend to trust very much. We also want to take a moment here to acknowledge opposing arguments. There's always going to be an opposing argument to what you say, and you want to acknowledge it. You don't want to be seen ignoring it. So it makes you more credible and thoughtful. If you think about, if you've ever been to a trial, or at least maybe seen the representation of a trial on television, admittedly not all television trials are realistic, but you often see in the final arguments them saying what the other lawyer, the lawyer will get up and say they'll make the case for the other side. Why would they do that? That seems stupid. Well, they're making the case for the other side because they want to knock it down. If they just ignored what the other side was going to say, they wouldn't seem credible. They would seem, clueless. So they say, well, my opponent will say this, and he's right on this, and he's wrong on that, and then you counter the arguments. And so essentially, what they're trying to do is preempt the opposing argument before the opposing argument is even made. Of course, both lawyers anticipate this and they try to get around it. But also, when you're trying to persuade people in a room, and you want them to go out and persuade other people. And so it's a ripple effect. So you want to give your audience ammunition against future opposing arguments. That's if truly effective speakers will have essentially evangelize, get their audience to continue to, to share that information with other people. Okay. All right. I want to talk a little bit about some use of reasoning and some other uses, some other techniques to talk about. And it's also important to understand that different cultures will tend to use different methods of persuasion. In the United States, we're very direct. We use some things called inductive and deductive reasoning, which I'll talk about in a moment. But we also use narrative methods where we tell a story, we induce emotions. And this is actually a more popular outside the United States, I'm told, when you're trying to persuade. You tell people stories, and stories have morals, and there's a lesson in the story. And that is, no, it doesn't necessarily have to be a fictitious story. I'm not necessarily talking about that, but you tell of an instance where something happened, where somebody did something, and there's some result came about, and which of course will support your central idea that you're trying to make in your speech. We also have inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, which I'll get into right away. Inductive reasoning is where we use specific instances to reach a general and probable conclusion. Actually, we do this all the time. We give specific examples of things that we're talking about, and we reach a conclusion. Now, we say it's a probable conclusion, and actually it's interesting to use this word because it actually is the basis of statistics, of sampling. The idea is that, and I remember in 8th grade, my math teacher, Mrs. Phillips, brought in a big barrel, a clear barrel, I think acrylic barrel of marbles. And some of these marbles were white, some of them were blue. And she wanted to know, well, what's the proportion of the marbles? How many, how do they relate to each other? And so she took out a sample, and we counted the sample. And this is called statistical sampling. And the idea is that you take examples, and you examine those examples and try to make that general and probable conclusion about the population that you're talking about, whether it's marbles or people or whatever. However, you can challenge the validity of this by asking, are there enough instances to support the conclusion? And are these instances typical? Hopefully they are, but we do have to be careful of what people call cherry picking the data. For instance, with the marble incident, if I pick, let's say, a quarter of the marbles were blue and 3/4 were white, and I specifically picked out blue marbles from my sample and said, oh, they're mostly blue. That's called cherry picking the data. And so you want to be very careful of that, and listen for arguments that do that. You will see some speakers who will be unethical, and they will use examples that are not truly representative. There was an incident a few years ago, very unfortunate incident. This 15-year-old was home alone at night, and there were 2 burglars who broke into the house, and they had guns. Luckily for this 15-year-old, there was an AR-15 in the house, and he was able to and some ammunition, and he was able to fend off these 2 intruders. And that's good, good for him. But then you had members of the NRA and people aligned with them saying, oh, see, this is why we need to have these type of weapons. Everyone should have assault weapons. Well, this is the only time this has happened that I know of, and certainly it may be the only time, or at least it's one of the very few times when this occurred. Actually, if you have weapons in the house, statistically, that weapon is more likely to kill somebody who lives in the house than somebody coming in from the outside, whether it's an accident or suicide or there's an argument, whatever. I'm glad this 15-year-old survived in that situation, but that is not a typical situation. But it was presented as a typical situation, and and ignored the other data of suicides and harm coming to people in the house from that gun. So, and also you have to ask, are these instances recent? Are they? And again, this goes back to when we discussed supporting data articles. I'm sorry, I'm in my my father's house, and because my power is out, that's why some things have not been set properly. Anyway, moving along. Deductive reasoning is just the opposite. It's actually where we use general facts to create specific and certain conclusions. And these general facts are things that we accept. These are not really debated. They're things that everyone accepts. It is much more powerful than inductive reasoning. However, it's a little harder to do. And it takes the form of what we call a syllogism. A syllogism is a three-part process. It has a major premise and a minor premise. The textbook uses these terms. I just say premise one, premise two. I don't know what makes one a major and a minor. But the point is, there are two things that are general facts that are generally accepted. And then when you put them together, they automatically bring you to a conclusion. For instance, excuse me. Let me give you a mathematical example. First premise, A equals B. Whatever A is, it equals B. So if A equals 4, then B equals 4. Okay. Second premise, B equals C. So if B is 2, C will equal 2, and vice versa. Okay, so A equals B and B equals C. What conclusion do we draw? Well, the conclusion you would draw almost automatically is whatever A is, it equals C. A equals C. This is actually in math called the commutative property. Okay, let's explore some non-mathematical examples. For instance, our first premise or major premise is all gods are immortal. Okay, being immortal is almost the part of the definition of a god. Second premise, Zeus is a god. Okay, if you're familiar with your Greek mythology, Zeus is god. Zeus was the sort of king or the top god. When you bring them together, I think you've already come to the conclusion on your own. I think at this point that obviously Zeus is immortal. It's kind of a commutative property. All gods are immortal. Zeus is a god, therefore Zeus is immortal. Okay. Let's try again with something that's maybe not so mythological. All trees have root systems. I think if you've ever seen a tree that didn't have a root system, we call it a log. It's no living tree. So I guess I should say all living trees have root systems. Okay. That one's pretty self-evident to anyone who lives in the world. Next premise, all root systems need nitrogen. And this is also true. You may not be aware of it, but plants need nitrogen to grow. If you don't believe me, you can consult someone from the science department or Google or well, not Google, wherever Google sends you, because Google itself, again, is not a source, but so forth. Therefore, you put these together and all trees need nitrogen. Again, it's like the commutative property. All trees have root systems, all root systems need nitrogen, then therefore all trees need nitrogen. So it's fairly straightforward. Now, admittedly, a syllogism is not always easy to set up. So you can't always avail yourselves of these, but if you can do it, it's a very powerful persuasive tool. Because once you set up the two premises, the audience members pretty much convince themselves. However, we should beware of the faulty syllogism. So our first premise is that 10 people can do work 10 times faster than one person. Well, let's say we're in a room and we need to move boxes, or you need to move the boxes, a whole bunch of boxes, maybe 100 boxes from one room to another. Okay, it's going to take a certain amount of time. But if I give you 9 other people to help you, you're going to get that job done roughly 10 times faster. Maybe not exactly, but roughly 10 times faster than just you doing it yourself. So I think we pretty much accept this. Next premise, one person can dig a post hole in 60 seconds. Now, you may not be familiar with digging post holes there and using a post hole digger. It's the idea is you're digging a hole that you can put like a fence post in. and it's using a post hole digger. It's like two shovels that are on a hinge, and the idea is that you slam it into the ground, pull it apart, and pull it up. It's a very good way to dig a narrow, deep hole, which is what you need for fencing. So a person can dig a post hole in 60 seconds, and of whatever depth you achieve in 60 seconds. So we'll leave it at that. Okay, so therefore, 10 people should be able to dig a post hole in 6 seconds. It's 10 times faster than one. Well, I think you have seen a problem here. How can 10 people dig a post hole in 6 seconds? They'd have to be physically in the same place. Maybe 2 people, one on either side of the post hole digger, working together, but 10, because people just can't physically exist in the same place. If we're digging a whole bunch of post holes, yes. So you just have to be careful. Never let common sense be pushed aside by a syllogism. But most syllogisms hold up fairly well, but occasionally you get a faulty syllogism, and you want to be aware of it. Okay. All right. Obviously, I can't take any questions in this video lecture. However, if you do have questions, feel free to email me or speak to me when we resume class. All right. So thank you very much, and hopefully I'll see you in class soon.